I set the grocery bags on the counter and paused, listening to the silence. Usually, there'd be a show on in the background or the hum of the dryer in the garage, something that told me this house was alive. That day, nothing. Just the tap of the clock on the wall. I remember rolling my shoulders, trying to ease the tension. Work had been tough lately, but I'd cut out early, hoping to do something nice, cook her dinner, maybe light a couple of candles if I could find any in the cupboard. I'm not one for big romantic gestures, but we'd been distant, and I figured something small might bridge the gap. I'd picked up some steaks, a bottle of her favorite white wine, though I never really liked wine, and a pack of those fancier candles they keep by the flower section. I even grabbed some fresh flowers. They were cheap, but they looked bright enough to maybe cheer her up. I was tired. Been tired for years, honestly. My job isn't glamorous. I'm a mid-level manager in a place that files claims for insurance companies. I handle paperwork, deadlines, keep track of numbers. It's a lot of spreadsheets and signatures. My boss, Greg, he's a talker. Likes to remind everyone how many hours he puts in. I always nodded along, did my job. I'm no star employee, but I get it done. Lately, though, the hours crept into my bones. I'd come home half dead, slump onto the couch, watch whatever she was watching, and not say much. She didn't say much back. That was the routine. And at some point, I realized we hadn't really looked each other in the eye in a long time. So I thought, screw it, I'd try a little surprise. Nothing fancy, just steaks, candles, some mashed potatoes maybe. I was never a great cook, but I can do the basics. And you know, sometimes you just feel that urge to do something, even if it feels a little forced. You tell yourself maybe that's what's needed, an excuse to talk. Some silly reason to laugh. I didn't want to let us slip any further. I set down the bags, took off my jacket, and listened again. Still no sign of her. Normally she'd call out, "Hey, honey," or something like that. But there was nothing. The quiet felt heavier than usual. I glanced at the clock, a bit past 5. I was earlier than normal, maybe that was why. Sometimes she took naps in the afternoon, or she might have gone to the store. But then I spotted her car keys on the little tray near the door, which meant she hadn't gone anywhere. I started pulling things out of the bags, steaks, the wine, a small bag of salad mix. The rustle of plastic sounded too loud, almost obnoxious in that silence. I remember looking at the steaks, thinking, yeah, these are pretty nice cuts, I bet she'll like them. Then I felt foolish for having that thought. I wasn't even sure if she'd be in the mood for dinner with me. We'd hardly spoken all week. But I shook it off and put the meat in the fridge. Then I grabbed the wine, looking at the label like I knew something about it. I didn't. She was the wine person, not me. But I figured it was fancy enough if the label had a script font. I walked into the living room. The lights were off, and the curtains were half drawn. The coffee table was clear. No magazines, no remote. It looked almost staged, like a house you'd see in a listing online. I noticed her purse on the couch, half open, with a lipstick tube rolling out. That told me she was definitely here, but I still couldn't hear a thing. My mind started drifting, maybe she was sleeping upstairs. Then again, she wasn't the type to nap at 5 in the afternoon. Sometimes she'd rest after lunch, but 5 was usually the time she'd be tidying up or checking her phone. I guess that's what felt off. It was the wrong kind of quiet for that hour. I stood there for a moment, scanning the room, feeling a tension in my stomach. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was just anxious about trying to be romantic, maybe worried she'd laugh at the idea of me cooking dinner. I set the flowers on the coffee table and thought about how they looked kind of sad in that dim light. I rubbed my chin, trying to decide if I should go upstairs or maybe just call her name. But something stopped me. Something about the hush in the house. I moved toward the stairs. Each step felt slow, like my body didn't want to go up there. I started hearing a faint sound. A voice, maybe 2 voices. The floor at the top of the steps creaked under my weight, and that's when I heard her laugh. It was low, and it sounded different. Not the laugh she used with me, not that polite chuckle in front of friends. It had a softness to it, like she was comfortable, or happy in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. My hand gripped the banister. For a second, I thought maybe she was on the phone. But I heard another voice, a man's. Immediately, my chest tightened. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was casual, like they'd been talking for a while. Then I caught a low murmur and her laughter again, and I felt a rush of heat crawl up my neck. I thought about turning around, heading back down, maybe stepping outside to gather myself. But my feet carried me forward. I reached the top, looked at the crack of light under our bedroom door. It was open a sliver. I could see a slice of the bed, the corner of a pillow. It was rumpled, like somebody'd been sitting there a while. I took another step, and the floorboard squeaked. The voices paused. My heart was hammering against my rib cage. Then her voice started up again, like she was responding to something, just quieter. I stepped closer. The door was open about an inch. I looked in, real careful. Didn't push it. Didn't burst in like some movie scene. I just stood there, feeling a kind of numbness spread through my limbs. I saw the side of her face first. She was leaning in, her hair draped over one shoulder. I could tell she was smiling. I recognized that tilt of her head from the time she used to look at me like that, though it had been a while. Then I saw his shoulder. He was turned toward her, one hand resting on the bed. My brain didn't register who he was at first. I just saw a man in my bedroom, close to my wife. For a second, I almost couldn't accept it. Then I heard his laugh, and that was it. I knew. I'd heard Greg's laugh 1,000 times at work, that smug little half-chuckle he does when he's feeling on top of the world. My boss. My own damn boss. The big man with all the answers, or so he liked to say. And there he was, in my bedroom, with my wife. The weirdest part is that I wasn't angry right away. It was more like everything froze. I felt my pulse in my ears, but my mind slowed to a crawl. I didn't barge in. I didn't say a word. I just watched them, half hidden by the door, not breathing. Her voice sounded softer than I'd ever heard it. She asked him something. I only caught the word. Tomorrow. He murmured back, something about time. Then she laughed again, that free, unguarded laugh. I realized she hadn't laughed like that with me in years. It felt like a stranger's laugh. It cut deeper than I can explain. I must have stood there another 30 seconds, just absorbing the scene. Then I guess I moved, because the door creaked wider. She turned, saw me in the doorway, and her face twisted into something I can't unsee. Shock, fear, guilt, all of it layered. She let out a small scream. Greg turned his head, looked at me, and his expression was half annoyance, half challenge. He didn't scramble, didn't act scared. He just glared, like I was some intrusion. Then he said it, those words that are burned into my memory. Well, now you know. I couldn't move for a moment. I just stared at him, then at her. She pulled the sheet up over herself, like that made a difference. Greg exhaled, got off the bed, and started pulling his clothes together. He never took his eyes off me, like he was daring me to do something. I think he expected me to explode or throw a punch. But I just stepped back, let him walk past. My wife stayed where she was, covering herself with the sheet, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. I went downstairs. My legs felt shaky, like they could barely hold me. I stood in the living room, hearing the rustle of clothes upstairs, hearing Greg move around. There was this dull ring in my ears, and I stared at the flowers I'd put on the table. I thought of the stupid candles in the grocery bag, the steaks in the fridge. The irony of it all. Then I heard the footsteps on the stairs. Greg came down, shirt half-buttoned, shoes in his hand. He gave me a sideways look. I said nothing. Couldn't even form a thought. He walked out the door, slamming it behind him. A minute later, I heard the car start up, and he was gone. I stood there for a long while, maybe a minute, maybe 10. Everything felt stretched, like time was holding its breath. Then I heard her come down the stairs, timid steps, like she was walking on shattered glass. She stood a few feet behind me. I could hear her breathing, uneven and shaky. I knew she wanted me to turn around, to talk, to scream, to do something. But I just stared at the flowers on the table. Yellow and orange petals, looking so out of place. She whispered my name once, then didn't say anything else. Eventually, she moved closer, but she didn't touch me. Finally, I walked to the kitchen, grabbed my jacket. She followed, standing in the doorway. Her eyes were red. She started to speak, but nothing came out. I can't even describe how I felt in that moment. There was a raw ache in my chest, but it was buried under a thick layer of numbness. I couldn't look at her. I went to the fridge, took out the wine, and just set it on the counter. Then I left, not saying a word. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it quietly behind me, got in my car, and drove. Didn't even know where I was going, just away from that silence, that betrayal, that look on her face. I remember my hands shaking on the wheel as I backed out. Part of me wanted to rage and part of me felt absolutely hollow. I think I ended up in a parking lot near a strip mall, just sitting there, trying to catch my breath, staring at the steering wheel like it might give me answers. I stayed there until the streetlights came on. Didn't call anyone, didn't text. Eventually I headed back, but I parked a block away, just in case I needed to leave again. My mind felt scrambled, but one thing was clear: I wasn't going to let this go. Not quietly, not this time. I walked home, heart thumping, not sure what I'd find inside. That's how the worst day of my life began, with a bag of groceries on the counter and a silence that told me everything I needed to know. I didn't plan on returning that night, but something in me needed to face it. Face her. A part of me thought maybe I'd walk in and she'd be gone, or that I'd find some kind of apology letter on the table. But when I pushed open the door, she was sitting on the couch, still in that robe, arms wrapped around her knees. The TV was off. The lights were low. She looked at me as if she wasn't sure I was real. I stepped inside, closed the door gently, and stood there. She opened her mouth, then closed it. We were like statues, two strangers sharing the same room. I stayed silent because my thoughts were all over the place. I wanted to ask her how long this had been going on, wanted to shout about how she could do this in our own home. But the words didn't form. I just stared at her, feeling the weight of something final that I couldn't name. That's how the night ended. I didn't speak. She didn't speak. Eventually, I went upstairs, got a blanket, and slept on the floor of the guest room. Didn't even turn off the light. Just laid there, eyes on the ceiling, trying to understand how the last 20 years could collapse in a single evening. And I had no idea that an even deeper betrayal lay right around the corner. I was just a man who came home early, hoping to cook dinner and maybe bridge a gap. And in 1 hour, I'd discovered the gap was an abyss I hadn't even known was there. That's how it started. That's how I stood on the edge of something that would change my life forever. Morning brought no answers, just more silence. I could hear her moving around downstairs, cleaning up or pacing. I didn't want to see her. I stayed in that guest room, looking at my phone, scrolling through nonsense. My shift would start soon. I thought about calling in sick, but I wasn't sure I wanted to stay home either. Finally, I got up, splashed some water on my face, pulled on yesterday's clothes, and went down. She was standing at the kitchen sink, staring out the window. She turned when I walked in, eyes rimmed with dark circles. I paused, waiting for her to speak, but she just opened her mouth and closed it again, like she couldn't find the words. So I left. Didn't say a thing. Walked out to my car and drove to the office. My mind was blank, except for the dull roar of anger rising behind the numbness. I told myself I'd figure out what to do later. But a part of me already knew I wasn't going to let them just walk away from this unscathed. I couldn't even look at Greg when I arrived, but I felt his presence. It was like a bad smell I couldn't get rid of. All day, I did my tasks. I typed numbers into spreadsheets. My brain was half there, half stuck on that image of them in my bed, her voice, his smug face. I felt the trembling in my hand. That's when I knew something in me had snapped. But I was going to keep it inside until I was ready. I'd make sure he paid for it. Because that's how it goes when you realize you've been taken for a fool in your own house. There's no peace until you act. I didn't know exactly what I'd do. But the idea started forming, and I was too far gone to stop it. The day dragged on, and I kept my head down, responding to emails, nodding at coworkers. Greg stayed in his office mostly. I think he knew better than to come out and face me. When the clock hit 5, I packed up slowly, let everyone else leave first. Then I headed out, my mind already spinning a plan I never thought I'd be capable of. That's the shape it took, the beginning of something I wouldn't be able to reverse. But at the time, all I could think was, I can't let him just walk free after what he did. I can't let her see me as a doormat. So I left the building that night, heart pounding, anger simmering, ready to become a man I didn't recognize. I got home, half expecting to see her gone. But she was there, curled up on the couch again, eyes puffy. I didn't ask if she'd been crying. She tried to talk when I walked in, but I just went straight upstairs without even meeting her gaze. I closed the door of the bedroom she'd slept in with him just yesterday. The bed was made, fresh sheets on. I felt sick looking at it. I turned around, walked back downstairs, grabbed the car keys again, and left for a drive around the block, just to clear my head. That's when I decided, tomorrow, I'd start putting my plan into motion. Because I refused to be the punchline in Greg's jokes. I refused to be the fool she'd cast aside. If they wanted to cross me, they'd learn that I might be quiet, but I'm not weak. I drove until I ran low on gas. Didn't remember half the streets. Didn't care. By the time I got back, it was late, and all the lights in the house were out. I parked, went in, and saw her door was closed. I took my blanket from the guest room and lay on the couch instead, not bothering to even undress. And I laid there in the dark, thinking of everything we'd built, everything that had just shattered. Funny how one night can do that. You think you know your life, and then it just cracks. By dawn, I'd decided. If Greg thought I'd just slink away, he was wrong. If my wife thought I'd just swallow this, she was wrong too. I was going to act. Because once you see the truth that clearly, there's no going back to pretending everything's fine. I was done pretending. I was done being the guy who'd come home early, arms full of groceries, hoping for a spark in a dead marriage. I was going to be the man who settled the score, for better or worse. That morning, I woke up stiff on the couch, my back sore. She was in the kitchen again, sipping coffee, eyes distant. I looked at her for a moment. We didn't speak. Then I left for work, ignoring the swirl in my gut. By the time I reached the parking lot at the office, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. And it wouldn't take long. I just had no idea how far it would go or what else I would discover. But I'd already made my choice. There was no turning back. I got through the door, nodded at a couple of people in the hallway, and sat down in my cubicle. Opened my emails, scrolled through them. My hands shook a bit on the keyboard. Everyone else was just living a normal Tuesday, but my world was in pieces. And Greg? He was up in his corner office like nothing had changed. I could feel his presence, but I refused to look up there. This was going to end on my terms. I just needed time to set it all in motion. That's all I kept telling myself as I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking back at me. Because once you decide to break the rules, there's a strange kind of calm that follows. Like you're past the point of no return, so at least you know you're moving. Even if it's straight into the fire. I clicked a few files, tried to focus on work. But inside I was replaying her laugh, replaying Greg's face, replaying that moment he said, "Well, now you know." As if it was all just a mild inconvenience. As if I was the one intruding in my own damn home. By lunchtime, I could barely stand the sight of my desk. So I got up, took my coat, and went outside. The sky was overcast, the air cool against my skin. I walked a few blocks, not really seeing anything. My mind was on the next step. I turned a corner, ended up by a small cafe. Went in, got a coffee I didn't want, sipped it until it went cold. I stared out the window, seeing my reflection in the glass. I looked older. More tired. Like I'd aged a decade overnight. I realized how quiet I was inside. Not peaceful, just stripped of feeling. Everything was about the plan. I set the coffee down and went back to the office. This was the day everything would start shifting for real. I walked in, saw Greg from a distance. Our eyes met. He didn't smile. Didn't nod. Just looked away. Coward. I returned to my desk, heart pounding but my face blank. And I waited for 5 o'clock, counting down the hours until I could move forward with what I had in mind. Because once you catch your wife with your boss, you either die inside or you do something. I wasn't going to just stand there and die. I left the office right on time and parked my car around the block out of view. I knew Greg would be gone soon. He always left a bit after 5, but I also knew the cleaning staff didn't come until later. The building would be mostly empty by 6. I'd watched Greg punch in the code for the security alarm on weekends, back when he'd asked me to come in for an extra load of work. He'd shown me how to reset it, trusting me because I was reliable. That memory burned now. But I was going to use every bit of trust he'd given me against him. I stayed in my car, watching employees trickle out. A few minutes after 5:30, I saw Greg exit the building. He walked to his big SUV, phone in hand, not a care in the world. He didn't even glance around. I kept my head low, not that it mattered. He wasn't looking for me. Why would he? He thought I'd swallow this. Maybe he even thought I'd quit. I waited until he drove off, then I waited another 30 minutes to be sure everyone else had cleared out. My heart thumped in my chest like a drum. I wasn't used to breaking rules. I was the quiet guy who paid his taxes, never got in trouble. But that version of me died the moment I saw him in my bedroom. At 6 sharp, I stepped out of the car, walked around the side of the building, and tried the door with my keycard. It beeped, the light turned green, and I slipped inside. The hallway lights were on, but it was eerily empty. The office was locked down in the sense that you needed a code to disable the after-hours alarm. I made my way to the small security panel by the stairwell. Punched in the code Greg had shown me months ago. The light went from red to green. That was it. I was in. The building felt strange without the usual buzz of phones and chatter. My footsteps sounded too loud on the carpet as I headed to the second floor. Greg's office was down the hall, a big corner room with a glass door. I'd never been in there alone after hours. It felt like I was stepping into a place I didn't belong, but I shoved that feeling aside. I tried the handle. Locked, of course. I paused. Then I slid my hand under the door jamb, feeling for the gap where Greg sometimes kept a spare key. He'd bragged about it once. In case I lock myself out, I got a backup. Sure enough, I felt a small magnetic holder. Took it out, unlocked the door. I stepped in, flicked on the desk lamp. My heart was hammering, but my mind was strangely calm. I went straight to his desk, powered on his computer. I knew he kept things on a local drive that wasn't fully backed up to the company's server. Personal files, side deals, half-legal stuff he sometimes boasted about. He had mentioned that if anyone saw those numbers, it'd be a headache. Well, that's what I was counting on. I jiggled the mouse, typed in the password he'd once let slip when he asked me to check an email for him while he was out. He never learned. Sure enough, the desktop loaded. I plugged in a USB drive I'd bought that morning from a convenience store. My hands were steadier than I expected. Within minutes, I was navigating his folders, copying everything that looked remotely private, personal emails, financials, client data, those couple of figures that no one was supposed to see. I took it all. Then I grabbed his phone from the charger on the desk. He'd left it plugged in, probably thinking he'd pick it up in the morning. Or maybe he had a second phone. Didn't matter. I connected it to the PC as well, downloaded texts, photos, whatever I could find. If it was digital, I took it. I was in there maybe 15 minutes total. I kept one ear open for any sound in the hallway. Nothing. Once I was done, I wiped my prints from the phone, powered off the computer, and turned off the desk lamp. Before leaving, I did one more thing. I found a little scrap of paper on his desk, a note he'd scribbled about some client. I drew a tiny checkmark at the bottom corner. I don't know why. Just some final flourish, I guess. Something that said, I was here. Maybe I wanted him to know it was me, or maybe I just wanted to mark the moment. Then I stepped out, locked the door behind me, and tucked the key back in its magnetic holder. I left the building the same way I came in, reactivating the alarm after I was out. My car was still there, engine cold. I climbed in, shut the door, and just sat for a minute, breathing heavily. What I'd done was way beyond anything I'd ever considered. I felt a thrill of panic, a jolt of satisfaction. I hated that satisfaction, but it was there, sitting in my gut. I started the car and drove out into the streetlights, heading nowhere in particular. I ended up at a dingy little bar near the highway, the kind of place with neon signs in the window. I parked, went inside, ordered a cheap beer, and sat at a corner table with my laptop. I connected to the bar's shaky Wi-Fi. My plan was half-formed, but I knew the basics. Post Greg's dirty files in a place where people would notice. There's a forum out there I'd stumbled on once or twice, full of guys who love picking apart shady corporate data. They'd do the rest. I just needed to upload it anonymously. So that's what I did. I logged in with a throwaway account, started a new thread, and dumped the files. I didn't say much, just teased that it was sensitive information from a mid-size insurance firm. They'd figure out what was in there soon enough. I also attached some of his personal emails. The kind that talked about hush-hush deals. Enough to bury him if it got in the wrong hands. And that's exactly where I was putting it. It took about 20 minutes to upload everything, the Wi-Fi crawling. The entire time, my stomach churned, half fear, half adrenaline. When it was done, I closed the laptop and just sat there, staring at the scratched-up table. My beer sat untouched. I finally took a swig, grimaced at how flat it was. Then I left. Walked out into the cold night air, my chest heaving like I'd run a mile. I got in my car and drove home, not sure how I'd face my wife, not sure if she'd even be awake. But one thing I did know, Greg's world was about to get a lot more complicated, and I didn't feel any remorse. When I got home, she was sitting on the couch again. Same spot. She looked up as I walked in, eyes flicking to the clock. I had no idea what time it was. Maybe 9 or 10. She opened her mouth, but I shook my head. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and downed it in one gulp. My heart was still racing from what I'd done. Then I slumped into the armchair, staring at nothing. She murmured something, but I didn't respond. I felt drained, dizzy. All I could think was, I did it. I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. And strangely, it made me feel more awake than I had in years. I slept in the armchair that night, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't move. She must have gone upstairs eventually. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, slow and tentative. Then silence. That's how that day ended. With me half awake in a chair, my life in ruins, but my revenge in motion. Over the next 2 days, I kept to myself. Went to work, did my job, avoided Greg's gaze whenever I passed him. He looked stressed, though. Kept checking his phone, cursing under his breath. I figured word was getting out about those files. People on that forum would be dissecting them by now, emailing them to reporters, or maybe contacting the company. It wouldn't be long before it all blew up. On day 3, I got into the office to find a flurry of whispers. Something about corporate coming in, an urgent meeting. Greg was locked in his office with HR people and some suits I'd never seen before. I just kept my head down, typed away, hiding the shaky feeling in my stomach. Around lunchtime, we all got an email that Greg was taking an indefinite leave of absence. In the break room, people were speculating that he'd been fired or forced out, something about impropriety. I didn't join in. I just nodded quietly when people talked, as if I was hearing it for the first time. That evening, I walked out to my car and saw Greg in the parking lot, stuffing papers into a box. He glanced at me, his eyes burning. I didn't say a word. Just got in my car and drove home. I never told him. Never gloated. Never confronted him in person. He might have suspected I had a hand in it, but he could never prove it. And I wasn't about to brag. That was enough for me. I'd taken something from him, just like he'd taken something from me. Maybe that made us even. Or maybe it just made me less of the man I used to be. I got home late, sat in the driveway for a few minutes, engine running, staring at the house. The thought of going inside felt suffocating. I knew she was there, waiting for me, or maybe not waiting at all, just existing in the same space. I finally killed the engine, stepped out, and went in. She was in the living room, the lights dimmed. She looked at me with tired eyes. I stared back, no warmth, no anger. Just nothing left to give. That's how it was for a week. We lived in the same house but barely acknowledged each other. It was like living with a ghost. And even though I'd wrecked Greg's career, I didn't feel healed. I just felt numb. Turns out, that was only the first betrayal. The next one would make everything else feel small. It was my daughter's turn for surgery, and they needed a blood donor. That's when I found out something that broke whatever was left of me. The hospital hallways always make me uneasy. They smell like disinfectant and sadness. But I was there for my daughter, my oldest, the one I'd always been proud of. She was in line for a procedure, something she needed for a while. They asked me to donate blood, so I did the usual tests. Then they pulled me aside, started asking questions about my relationship to her. I didn't understand why. They said my blood type wasn't compatible. Then they talked about genetics, how certain markers just weren't matching up. It didn't sink in at first. I thought maybe there was a lab error. But the doctor gave me that careful look people give when they're trying not to cause more pain than necessary. I stood there, hearing the beep of monitors, the shuffle of nurses, and this doctor telling me something that shattered the last piece of ground I'd been standing on. I wasn't her biological father. That's why my blood wasn't compatible. That's why the markers didn't match. I felt the floor tilt under me. The hospital smell got sharper, like bleach in my nostrils. I didn't show any emotion on my face. Just nodded blankly. The doctor looked at me with pity, said maybe there was a mistake, or maybe we should confirm with more tests. I just walked away, my limbs numb. I made some excuse, said I needed air, and left the hospital. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. It was the same feeling I'd had when I saw Greg in my bedroom. Everything froze, but now it was deeper. This wasn't just about me. This was about my daughter, the girl I'd raised, the one I'd tucked into bed so many nights, taught to ride a bike, helped with homework. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in. I started the car and just drove, not sure where I was going. Somehow, I ended up in front of a small private lab, the kind that does DNA testing. I'd seen their sign before. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe I just needed confirmation, a piece of paper to make it real. So I took her hairbrush from the back seat, the one she'd left there weeks ago, and walked inside. Told them I needed to run a paternity test. The woman at the desk gave me a form to fill out. I did it in silence, paid the fee in cash. She took the brush, sealed it in a bag. Told me to come back in a few days for the results. I don't remember the drive home. I just remember stumbling into the house, ignoring my wife's questions, going straight to the guest room, and locking the door. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides. I laid on the bed, shoes on, staring at the ceiling for hours, not moving, not thinking. If the affair with Greg had hurt me, this new discovery tore me wide open. Because it wasn't just about one moment of betrayal. It was a whole lifetime built on a lie. And I had no idea if my wife had planned to tell me or if she even knew for sure. But right then I didn't care. I was done talking to her. Done with everything. For the next few days, I went through the motions, waiting for the lab to call. They finally did, said the results were ready. I drove down there, walked inside, and they handed me an envelope. The woman tried to hand me a pamphlet for counseling or something. I just walked out without a word. Sat in my car, the envelope in my lap, and thought about how my life had become some soap opera cliché, except this was real. Then I opened it. Read the line that said, "Paternity cannot be established." So that was it. I wasn't her father. 20 years of living a lie. 20 years of loving a child who wasn't mine. I went home, set the envelope on the kitchen counter. My wife was out, didn't matter. I sat down, stared at it. Felt no tears, no rage. Just a big, empty hole. Later that day, she came in, saw me sitting there, the envelope in front of me. She approached it like it was a bomb. Then she started crying, mumbling apologies, saying something about how it was a mistake, how she never knew for sure. I just picked up the envelope, walked upstairs, and tucked it into my sock drawer without a word. A week later was my birthday. She tried to make a cake. I didn't eat it. She tried to put candles on it. I didn't even look at them. The sadness in her eyes might have been genuine, but I didn't care anymore. I felt like a stranger in my own life. That night, after she went to bed, I took out the envelope, looked at it one more time, and realized I had no more tears left. I blew out the candle on the kitchen table, just a single leftover candle from her attempt to celebrate, and walked off to bed. There was no anger, no sorrow. Just emptiness. The next morning, I knew I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Couldn't keep pretending. I didn't pack her things or confront her. I didn't want any drama, no final arguments. I just wanted out. So I made a plan to sell the house. The market was decent, and we had enough equity to walk away with a good chunk of money. I told her, flatly, that I was selling. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Then she started crying again, pleading with me to reconsider. I said nothing. Just went about the paperwork. It took a couple of months to finalize, during which we barely spoke. She tried to approach me a few times, tried to talk about therapy, or asked if we could discuss the truth of what happened. But I was past caring. My daughter, no, I still thought of her as my daughter, but I couldn't face her either. She was away, recovering from her procedure. I didn't go visit. That probably makes me a terrible person, I know. But I couldn't look her in the eye without feeling the weight of that envelope in my sock drawer. I'm not proud of it. I just couldn't handle it. Once the sale went through, I took my share, bought a used trailer. One of those simple ones you hitch to a truck. Not fancy, but livable enough. I gave my wife, ex-wife, I guess, her portion of the money. She tried to talk, tried to find out where I was going. I never told her. I just packed up a few things and left. Before I left, though, I did one final thing. I gathered all the proof of her affair with Greg, the pictures I'd found on her phone one night when she was asleep, the messages I'd pulled off his laptop, the DNA results. Put them in a box along with our old wedding photos and the ring I'd worn for 20 years. Then I took a hammer to the ring, flattened it. Slipped it into the box with everything else. Taped it up, wrote my name on the top in pen, and shipped it to her. No note, no explanation. Just the box of everything that had died between us. So she'd know that I knew everything, all the ugly details. Then I hit the road, pointed my truck north, and ended up in Idaho, near a small lake where nobody asked questions. I parked the trailer, paid a bit of rent at a quiet campground, and that's where I've stayed. Haven't looked back. Haven't reached out. I figure she got the box by now. Probably opened it, and cried or cursed me. Maybe she burned it all. I don't care. It's not mine anymore. Sometimes, when I'm out by the water, the memory of her laughter creeps back in. That sound she made when she was with Greg in my own bedroom. It stings less now, but there's still a hollow place in me, like something got scooped out and never refilled. I fish. I cook over a small fire, I stare at the sunset. It's quiet here. Nobody laughs behind my back, and I don't owe explanations to anyone. I'm not proud of the man I've become. But I'm not sorry either. I did what I had to do. If that makes me a bad person, so be it. At least I'm not living a lie anymore. Maybe that's all I can say in my defense. That and the fact that I haven't felt the need to punch a hole in a wall or break down crying. I just feel empty. And maybe that's better than whatever I felt before. So here I am, sitting by a lake in Idaho, watching the clouds drift across the water. Sometimes I cast a line. Sometimes I just sit there, letting the silence fill my ears. People think silence is peaceful, but it can be heavy. It can hold every memory you're trying to forget. But it's the path I chose. Or maybe it's the only path that was left. I don't hate her. I don't even hate Greg. Hate would require too much energy, and I'm running on fumes. I just exist now, day by day, letting the numbness do its thing. Part of me is glad I stood up for myself. Part of me wonders if I went too far. But I can't change it. That's the story. That's how my life split wide open and spilled out. If I close my eyes, I can still see the box I mailed her. The pictures, the wedding ring hammered flat, the test results that gutted me. It feels like a movie someone else watched, except I know it was me. I can't rewrite it. I can't fix it. I can only live with it. And I do, here by the water, every single day. I guess if there's a silver lining, it's that I'm not trapped in that house anymore, pretending. Pretending she loved me, pretending my boss respected me, pretending my daughter was mine by blood. The truth burned all that away. What's left is a man alone in a trailer, but at least it's real. At least I can breathe in and out without wondering who's laughing behind my back. So that's it. That's what happened. I'm not a hero. I'm not looking for sympathy. I just wanted to get it off my chest, I suppose. Because sometimes, you carry a secret so heavy it drags you under. But now you know, the same way I came to know in that upstairs room, hearing her laugh. Sometimes I still hear it in my head at night. Maybe that's the price I pay for walking away, for setting everything on fire behind me. But I'd do it again. Because once trust is gone, there's nothing left to salvage. And I'd rather be here, alone, than pretend everything's okay back in that house of lies. That's my story. That's all there is. I wake up, I fish, I watch the sky. The mornings are crisp, the nights are cold, and the days are quiet, exactly how I need them to be right now. Maybe one day I'll move on, find some little town, try to start over. Or maybe this is it. Either way, I won't regret leaving. And I won't regret making Greg pay. He had it coming, and so did she. In the end, all the regrets in the world won't bring back what they took from me. So I keep my line in the water, wait for a bite, and let the emptiness settle. It's not a happy ending, but it's the one I've got. And I can live with that.